Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone and welcome to our presentation today. So we are from group 7 and we're going to talk about the conflict between Israel and Palestine. In this group is consists of 3 members. The first one is Raden Muhammad Anggrid Ardiansyah, Saeful Bahri, and myself, Salsabila Masya. And our topic for today, we're going to discuss about 5 topics. The first one is brief explanations of Palestine and Israel. Second one is history of beginning the conflict. The third one is current conflict condition. The fourth is UN international responses to the Palestine and Israel conflict. And then the last one is the impact of the conflict. So um, to saving the time, let's start the first discussion with my friend Saiful Bahri.
Hello everyone, my name is Saeful Bahri. I will explain about a little general information of country Palestine and Israel. First, talk about Palestine. One, firstly, a country in the Middle East. A country in the Middle East, Palestine, is a country in the Middle East between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. Secondly, status. Status of country is partially recognized country, UN observer country and recognized by 138 UN member country. Third, capital city is Ramallah. This is city of center government. Fourth, government is parliamentary republic. The system of government in Palestine is parliamentary republic. The Palestinian National Council, which is synonymous with the Palestinian Parliament, has 500 members. In word, this institution consists of executive committee, information institution unit, Palestinian military institution, Palestinian research center, Palestinian planning center, and lastly, uh, officially established on 50 November 1988. Palestine is a state in the form of parliamentary republic, which was declared its establishment on November 50, 1988 in Algeria, the capital of Algeria. Next, Israel. One, a country in the Middle East. First, Israel is neighbor with Palestine, so it is located the same, namely in the Middle East, surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and the Sinai Desert. In addition, it is surrounded by 2 areas of the Palestinian National Authority, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Second, the one and only country Yahudi in the world. The one and only country Yahudi in the world with a population of 7.5 million. Israel is the only Yahudi or Jewish state in the world. In addition, there are also several other minority ethnic group, including Arab ethnic who have Israel citizenship, along with other religious groups such as Muslims, Christians, Druze, Samaritans, and others. Third, capital city is Jerusalem. Capital city is Jerusalem. West Jerusalem, while Palestine is the capital of Ramallah in East Jerusalem. Fourth, government is parliamentary democracy. Fourth, the system of government in Israel is parliamentary democracy. The Prime Minister of Israel is the head of government. Executive power is held by the government. Legislative power is vested in the Knesset. The judiciary is independent from the executive and legislative branch. And last of Israel, freedom on 40 May 1948. And last of Israel, freedom on 14 May 1948. On May 14, 1948, Israel proclaimed its independence, and this was immediately followed by wars with the surrounding Arab countries, which rejected this division plan. And Israel later won this war and confirmed its independence. As a result of this war, Israel succeeded in expanding its state border beyond the boundaries determined by the Palestine partition plan. Since then, Israel has been in constant conflict with neighboring Arab countries, causing wars and violence that have continued to this day.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the history of Israel and Palestine conflict. In the history of the conflict, they define the timeline with 6 points. So let's start with the beginning. So the first point is in 586 before century until 1799. In this time, it started before the World War One. The Middle East was controlled by the autonomous sultan for almost 4 centuries. The Palestinian territories in the past were known as the Canaan, Judea, and the Holy Land. In 1000 to 586 before century, Palestine was a Jewish state that became a colony of Babylon, Persia, Macedonia, and several Greek kingdoms. And it was only in 636 that this region came under Islamic rules. When the colonies from European nations, many Jews were transported into exile and become prisoners in the territories of those nations. And in 1799, the Napoleon Bonaparte is reigned and proclaimed that the Jews in Asia and Africa gathered to re-establish the holy city of Jerusalem and to be able to establish their state in the Palestinian territories, which has been under the rule of Muslim in that time. Okay, so in second part is in 1882 until 2020. In this time, the Zionist movement begin to appear. The leaders or the Zionist drivers is Theodor Herzl. The Zionists believe that their Jewish citizens around the world is must return to the promised land. but the consideration is not have benefit to the Palestine, so the Palestine is reject of the colonization of the Jews. And in the third time, in 1947 to 1949, in that time, on 23 until 29 November in 1947, the United Nations held a session on the Palestinian issue. For the trial, the resolution was issued which contained the division of Palestinian territories for Jews and Muslims. However, the resolution was rejected by the Palestinians because they demand the entire territory. A year later, in 1948, there was a war between Jewish Israel and Muslim Arab in the middle of East. And after the war in 3rd April 1949, Israel and the Arabs is agreed to had a ceasefire and division the territory. But uh, there's about 80% of the Palestinian territories are controlled by Jews. And then in the fourth point is in 1950 until 1967, the Islamic Palestinian struggle is still returned with the establishment of the Palestinian Liberation Organization or PLO. The PLO was made Palestine to sovereignty and um, to protect the Palestine from war and also from the diplomacy. Okay, so in the five in okay, so in the 5 point in 1980 in 1968 until 1992, after the Israel occupation of the West Bank, Gaza Strip in Sinai, and Israel is start to building the settlement in that area. In these colonies, the settlers were allowed to carry weapons under the protection of the Israel army. And in late 1960, the tensions between the Palestine and the Jordanian government also escalated sharply. In September 1970, the bloody military battles were held between the Jordan and Palestinian army organizations, and Jordan was able to put down the Palestinian uprising. And in 1987, after 20 years of brutal military occupations, the first Intifada began in occupy the Palestinian territories. Rebel, the rebellion developed into the terror attack targeting the Israel Philistine. Not only targeting Israel Philistine, but also PLO did did not hesitate. The people do not execute people who supporting the Israel. And it is estimated that thousands of Palestinians were killed by the Israel soldiers and hundreds of Israel were killed by the Palestinians. And in addition, it is estimated like like 1,000 Palestinians were killed by Israel, and this revolution only ended in 1992. And then after the long history in 1993 until the present, so it was continued in 28 September in 1995 when the implementation of the Oslo Agreement was carried on. The Palestinian Authority was soon established. However, it is not easy to establish the Palestinian state. The Hamas group and the other Palestinian factions opposed the deal. The tension between the two parties continued until finally renewing the agreement of the Camp David Second Summit in 2000. But the agreement was failed and the terror attack on Israel by the Hamas group and the rest of the territories by Israel is still continuing. And then in present now, there's still a lot of terrorist attacks from the Hamas and also from the Israel, and it still continue until now.
The current situation of Palestine, Israel bombed the Gaza Strip and the US response. This is news 18 May 2021. US President Joe Biden has the third telephone conversation with Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Report by Al Jazeera. In the telephone conversation, Biden expressed his support for a ceasefire. At least, at least uh, 212 Palestinians, including 61 children, have died in Gaza since the violence began, and Israel has reported 10 people dead, including 2 children. Israel deadliest attack on Palestine so far occurred on Sunday, with at least uh, 42 people killed, including 10 children. Israel hacked into a network of underground tunnels, causing three buildings to collapse. The attack damaged a medical clinic run by a group Doctors Without Borders, forcing it to close. Israel has come under fire around the world and caused protests that have taken place in recent days in cities including Baghdad, Berlin, and London.
Next, I will explain about UN and international responses to the Palestine-Israel conflict. Israel effort to carry out the forced, forced, forced eviction of Palestinians living in Sheikh Jarrah have drawn international condemnation, including from the United Nations, UN, and the world. In addition, a number of countries also condemned Israel for the event the look pledge at the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the effort to expel Palestine in Sheikh Jarrah. The following are some of the reactions from the United Nations and the world the Palestine Israel and Israel conflict. Number one, the UN Right Office urged Israel to cancel any forced eviction and warned it is action called among the war crime. In this in this regard, the United Nations wishes the emphasis that is Jerusalem remain part of occupied Palestine territories where international humanitarian law applies, and and accompanying power unable to confiscate personal property in occupied territory. Transferring civilian to occupied territory is illegal under international law and can constitute a war crime. Next, number two, Turkey. Turkey criticized Israel and accused it of unleashing terror on Palestine after Israel police fire rubber coated ballot and electric grenade. Several Turkey officials criticized Israel and called on other countries to voice condemnation. While a foreign ministry statement urged Israel to immediately and it is provoked behavior hostility and act with excess. Turkey has blamed Israel and those who have remained silent in the face of the humiliating attack. Turkey President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called Israel a state of terror and called on all Muslim countries and the international community to take effective measures against Israel. Turkey has launched the necessary initiative to call on the United Nations, the Organization for Islam Cooperation (OIC), and all relevant agencies to take action. Number three, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has criticized the planned eviction of Palestine in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Saudi Arabia rejects Israel plan and action to expel dozens of Palestinians from their home in Jerusalem and impose Israel sovereignty over them. Next, number four, United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates condemned Israel action. The UAE, which normalized relations with Israel last year, strongly con- condemned the crisis and potential eviction and urged Israel authorities to ease tension. Number five, European Union. The European Union has condemned the violence in the region and urged the authorities to immediately ease tension. Violence, the incitement in is unacceptable and perpetrator on all sides must the hill to account. The European Union call on the authorities to act immediately to reduce the current tension in Jerusalem.
Okay. So now we are going to talk about the impact from the conflict. The conflict given to Indonesia and the road from the Palestinian and Israel conflict. We define it into 2 points. The first one is in for international community, and then the second one for Indonesia. For international community, there is the first one is the emergence of anti-Jewish sentiment in several Islamic countries. The second one is emergence of solidarity among Muslims in the world to support the Palestinian case. And then the last one is the occurrence of political and security crisis in the Middle East region. For Indonesia, the conflict between Israel and Palestine will also have a major impact on Indonesian economy if the conflict widens, which will involve many Middle East countries. And if many Middle East countries are involved in Israel conflict with Palestine, it is certain that they will be increasing the world oil price and will have a major impact on the national economy. And also, in the other hand, Israel, the United States, and several Western countries is reject the proclamations of, of Palestinian independence. So, it causing the conflict between Palestine and Israel to continue today. So there's the end of our presentations. I hope you all had something to learn. And if you have any question, you can ask in comment section. So thank you so much for watching our video. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.